Good evening. Well, the great news is that the Hubble Space Telescope repair mission has been a complete success. Let me show you what's happened. Here's a picture of the spiral galaxy, Messier 100, taken by Hubble before the repair. And here is the new picture, and what a difference. And we now know that the telescope is going to be every bit as good as was planned, and that is really tremendous. Do you know where to find Quetzalcoatl, Huang Chi, Erxleben, and Zuben Ganubi? Well, I can tell you. You'll find them in the sky. And some of the sky names really are rather bizarre. Now, I thought it might be fun to say something about them. So let's begin with the moon. The naked eye shows you dark patches on the moon. They were once thought to be seas, and they were named accordingly. The Sea of Tranquility, Ocean of Storms, and so on, even though they are not seas and never were. But there are also craters. In 1651, the Italian astronomer Riccioli drew a map of the moon and adopted a system of naming craters after famous people, generally astronomers. For example, that large, flat-floored crater down to the lower right was named Ptolemaeus after the last great astronomer of Greek times. And that was a good system, and this worked very well, and we still use it, though of course it has been extended since to accommodate later astronomers. With the planets, we come to mythology. Now, Mars was the god of war, and therefore Mars, the red planet, was named accordingly. And there is a Viking picture of Mars. But from Earth, we can see bright and dark areas on it, and those were named originally in the 1860s. And a map of Mars was drawn by the English astronomer Richard Proctor, and there is Proctor's map. And he followed Riccioli's principle and named the features upon Mars after famous people. For example, that triangular area on the left-hand map near the middle of the picture was named the Kaiser Sea, after a German astronomer who thought then to be a sea. And above that we have Lockyer Land, after a famous British astronomer. Now, that wasn't very well received. In 1877, Giovanni Schiaparelli in Italy made observations of Mars. I may say he drew maps including the famous Martian canals, and there's a Schiaparelli map, and those canals, I'm afraid, don't exist at all. They were tricks of the eye. But Schiaparelli also altered all the names and went back to mythology and geography. For example, in his map, out goes the Kaiser Sea, in comes the Syrtis Major, which is the Libyan Gulf. Out goes Lockyer Land, in comes Hellas, the original name for Greece. And we still use those names, though in some cases they've had to be modified. For example, Schiaparelli saw a bright speck that he called Nix Olympica, the Olympic snow. And I've seen it with my own telescope. He didn't know what it was. We now know, thanks to the space probes, it is a huge volcano, 15 miles high. Look at that, with a 40-mile crater on the top. And we now call that Olympus Mons, or Mount Olympus. So we have mythology there, and the two tiny satellites of Mars, discovered in 1877, have been named Phobos and Deimos after the mythological attendants of the war god. Next, what about Mercury, the innermost planet? Very quick-moving, and therefore named in honor of the messenger of the gods. By no means easy to study, it's only about 3,000 miles across, and always stays close to the sun in the sky. Incidentally, for the first part of this month, you can see it very low down in the southwest after sunset. The best pre-space age map was drawn by the Greek astronomer Eugenios Antoniadi, who used the very powerful telescope at the Observatory of Meudon, the 33-inch. And he produced a map of Mercury in the 1930s, and he gave the dark features that he saw names, such as Solitude of Hermes Trismegistus, the wilderness of Hermes, the thrice greatest. But through no fault of his own, his map was not accurate, and his names have not been retained. Our only real information comes from one probe, Mariner 10, which made 3 active passes of Mercury in the 1970s, and sent back pictures showing craters, mountains, and other features looking rather like those of the moon. Now, naming is the responsibility of the controlling body of world astronomy, the International Astronomical Union, and they've rather followed Riccioli and given the crater names after personalities. But there are one or two exceptions. There, on the left-hand side, you can see part of a huge ringed basin, and that's called the Caloris Basin, or the heat basin, because when Mercury is closer to the sun is almost overhead from that basin, and the temperature rockets to over 700 degrees Fahrenheit, so the Caloris Basin is a good name for it. With the moon, Mars and Mercury, you can see features. With Venus, of course, you can't. Now, with the naked eye, Venus is lovely. Name it after the goddess of beauty. But we can't see through the dense atmosphere, and even space probe pictures can't do that. There's one of them. All we're seeing is the top part of a layer of cloud. But thanks to radar, we can now penetrate the cloud, and this has been done by various probes, including Magellan, and that's what Venus might look like if we could see through the atmosphere. And we now know there are high mountains there are craters, and there are valleys, and they all have to be named. And to be entirely politically correct, the IAU has laid down that all names on Venus must be female. Some are familiar. There, for example, is Cleopatra. But what about those three I mentioned earlier? Quetzalcoatl, Huangqi, and Erxleben. Well, if you want to know, they are respectively an Aztec fertility goddess, a Chinese poetess, and a German scholar. I thought you'd like to know. And just imagine what happens if we ever terraform Venus and go there. And we're driving along and come to a road junction. Do you go to Altamira Road on one way or Huangqi Motorway on the other? I don't know. There is, incidentally, one masculine name on Venus. This is Gula Mons in the range of mountains known as the Maxwell Mountains. And they are named after the Scottish mathematician James Clerk Maxwell. And that was done before the IAU edict was passed. And so Maxwell is the only man anywhere on Venus. What about the giant planet? Jupiter, the king of the gods, the main planet is named in his honor, which is quite right. The satellites, the four main ones, are also given mythological names. Here's a mosaic of Jupiter and the four main satellites from Voyager pictures, and those satellites are Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, all of which are mythological. For example, Ganymede was the cupbearer of the gods. But features on these satellites have now been seen by the Voyagers, and they've been named by the International Astronomical Union. For example, consider Callisto, the outer satellite, with an icy, cratered surface. The names there come from Norse mythology. There's one huge ringed basin, there it is, and that's named Valhalla, which I think is rather a good name for it. Beyond Jupiter, the outermost planet known in ancient times, named after Saturn, who was Jupiter's father and also the god of time. Again, there are satellites. Again, the names there have been given according to mythological characters. Here, for example, is Dione, who was Saturn's wife, and also his sister. I'm afraid the morals of the old Olympians don't really stand up for examination. Now, what about the planets discovered in telescopic times? In 1781, William Herschel discovered a new world, and it's now known as Uranus, after Saturn's father and the first ruler of Olympus. Herschel himself wanted to call it the Georgian star, after King George III, but that wasn't at all popular, and finally Uranus was adopted. The outermost giant planet was then discovered and was named Neptune after the sea god, and that, I think, again, was a good mythological name. But what about the satellites of these outer planets? Uranus has a whole family. John Herschel, William Herschel's son, suggested naming the first four not after mythological characters, but after characters in Shakespeare's plays and Pope's poem, The Rape of the Lock. And they were named Ariel, Umbriel, Titania, and Oberon. And when another satellite was found, in 1948 by Kuiper, that was also given a Shakespearean name, Miranda. So there we have a departure from the norm, which I think is a great pity. But when we come to the satellites of Neptune, we are back to mythology. And the main satellite of Neptune is named Triton after a minor sea god. And there that lovely Voyager 2 picture of Triton with a pink snowcap with the active geysers. There is one more planet, if we can call it a planet, discovered in 1930 by my old friend Clyde Tombaugh. And a name had to be found for it. One name suggested was Minerva, but that was proposed by an American astronomer, TJJC, who was very unpopular with his colleagues. So his name was not accepted, and instead it was named Pluto, after the god of the underworld. And that, I think, is quite a suitable name, because Pluto is far out in the solar system, and Pluto's kingdom must have been a gloomy place. Then, in 1977, a satellite was discovered, and that was called Charon, after the gloomy ferryman who used to take departed souls across the river Styx into Pluto's kingdom. And there's a Hubble picture of Pluto and Charon seen separately. So much then for planets. What about asteroids? Now, they mainly lie in the region between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. The first was discovered in 1801 by Piazzi at Palermo. Now, asteroids can be named by their discoverers, and Piazzi suggested the name Ceres after the patron goddess of Sicily. and there's a picture of Ceres on the end of the arrow. That was very good. Later asteroids were also given mythological names. But very soon the supply began to run out, and by now thousands of asteroids are known, and some of the names are rather interesting. For example, asteroid 2309 is named Mr. Spock, after a ginger cat, which was itself named after Mr. Spock of Star Trek fame. And I can't resist showing you a picture of asteroid 2602, discovered by Dr. Boel at the Lowell Observatory. There it is on the end of the arrow, and there it is 2 days later when it has shifted. And he very kindly named it after me, so asteroid 2602 is now officially known as Moore, and as Clyde Tombaugh said about his asteroid, at least I now have a piece of real estate that no one can touch. Comets are usually named after their discoverers. For example, the bright comet of 1970, Bennett's Comet, discovered by Jack Bennett from South Africa. But sometimes after the mathematicians who first computed their orbits. Here's a picture of the Statue of Episodes of Edmund Halley, who should really be Hawley, the second astronomer royal. He observed a bright comet in 1682 and realized that it came back regularly every 76 years, so he predicted a return for 1758, and it duly turned up. And quite rightly, it's now known as Halley's Comet, and of course it last came back in 1986, and it'll be back once more in the year 2061. And another comet named after a mathematician is Encke's Comet. There it is, that fuzz over to the right-hand side of the picture. And that comes back every 3 1/3 years. And the man who realized that he did precisely that was the director of the Berlin Observatory, Johann Encke, and it's named after him. It has a very small orbit, doesn't go as far as Jupiter, and we can actually now follow it for the entire time. So we can always see Encke's Comet with powerful telescopes. Now, when we come to the stars, we are back to mythology. But do bear in mind that what we call a constellation has no real significance, because the stars in any particular constellation are at very different distances from us. Some may be in the background, so to speak, and they are not genuinely associated with each other. So, for example, had we followed the Chinese or the Egyptian patterns, our star maps would look quite different, even though the stars would be the same. We follow the Greek patterns. For example, there is Orion, the hunter, that lovely constellation which dominates the evening sky all the way through the winter and into early spring. Has 2 brilliant stars, and you can't mistake the pattern. That's named after the great mythological hunter who boasted he could kill any creature on earth. But he'd forgotten the scorpion, which crawled out of a hole in the ground, stung him in the heel, and killed him. The gods then relented, brought Orion back to life, and placed him in the sky. Just to be fair, they put the scorpion there too, but very prudently put Orion on the scorpion and the exactly opposite sides of the sky so they can't meet. And looking at the scorpion, I think you'll agree that it is one of the very few constellations which does bear some resemblance to the object after which it's named. Then what about the most famous of all northern constellations, Ursa Major, the Great Bear? There's a legend there too. Apparently, Ursa Major was a beautiful maiden named Callisto, whose beauty was greater than that of Juno, the Queen of Olympus. Juno, being insanely jealous, changed Callisto into a bear. Years later, Callisto's son, Arcas, was out hunting, saw the bear, and was about to shoot it when Jupiter intervened. He changed Arcas into a bear also, leant down from Olympus, caught both animals by their tails, and swung them into the sky, which is where we now see them. And that's why both the bears have got very long tails. I must say the Americans call the Great Bear the Dipper, which isn't a bad name for it, and of course many people also call it the Plough. Then there are some constellations suggested by past astronomers that have not survived. One ancient constellation is Hydra, the water snake, actually the largest constellation in the sky. And perched upon that are the Crow, Corvus, and Crater, the Cup. But look down there to the left-hand side, and you will see Noctua, the night owl. Now, the constellation patterns are frankly rather unwieldy, and finally the International Astronomical Union lost patience, revised the map, and cut some of the constellations out. So Hydra, Corvus, and Crater are still there, but poor little Noctua has disappeared. Then, what about the constellations of the zodiac? All are named after living things, except one, and that is Libra, the scales or balance. But originally, Libra was the scorpion's claws, and it's stolen 1 or 2 stars from the scorpion. Earlier on, I mentioned Zuban el Genubi, and that is the proper name of the star Alpha Librae, the scorpion's claw. Quite different, is Lynx, the Lynx. Now that's a constellation quite close to the Great Bear. And when you see the figure, it looks rather imposing. In fact, there are no bright stars there at all. It's a very blank area of the sky. And somebody once said that you need eyes like a lynx to see anything there at all. Then, finally, what about star names? Now, most of these are not Greek. Most of them are Arabic. Come back to Orion. There are 2 brilliant stars there. Betelgeuse in the top left-hand corner, and the Rigel in the lower right. Betelgeuse, the armpit of the central one, and Rigel, the foot. I may say that these names can be spelt and pronounced in various different ways. Nobody really knows, so pronunciation experts, please don't write to me about it. But those are 2 of the bright star names, and there are others. Most are Arabic, but there are some that's not. And one name that's not Arabic is that of the brightest star in the sky, the dog star in Canis Major, the great dog, often called Sirius. It actually should be Sirius, from the Greek word meaning sparkling or scorching. So that's one of the names that is not Arabic, although most of them are. But nowadays, the individual or proper names of stars are not used except for the 20 brightest stars and a few special ones, such as Polaris, the pole star. Otherwise, we refer to them by their catalogue numbers. And there's one other point I must make here. All cosmic naming is the responsibility of the controlling body of world astronomy, the International Astronomical Union. Now, stars are no longer named. Bodies in the solar system are, but stars are not. There are some agencies which say they can name stars for you on payment of a sum of money. But I must stress that any names given there are entirely unofficial and will not be recognized by any astronomical body. And I think I must end by one story that I believe is actually true, though I can't actually vouch for it. Apparently, there was a lecture given by a very famous astronomer, attended by a popular audience, and one dear lady stood up at the end and said, "Yes, I've listened to your lecture. I've been fascinated by it. But there's one thing I'm not sure about. I do understand perfectly how you discover all these facts about the bodies in the sky. But one thing I don't know, how do you find out their names?" Well, as I say, I can't vouch for it. Now, don't forget, if you want the latest astronomical information, you can dial up our information line, 0891 800 330, or CFAX, page 685. And when I come back next month, I'm going to be talking about Clementina, the latest lunar probe, which will, by then, be on its way to the moon. Good night.